Hello, I'm Alistair McIntyre. I'm the guy that puts together the Electric Scotland websites. This is a slightly new departure because I've been doing a weekly newsletter for years now. It's basically a text newsletter. And I thought maybe what I would try and do here is maybe do a kind of video version of it to see whether maybe this might be of interest. When you go to our website, in the menu at the top there is actually a link to newsletter. And when you click the newsletter, you will actually go to our weekly newsletter forum in our Electric Scotland community, which is basically a forum system. The very first link you'll see in that forum is introduction, and in there we basically give you a little bit of advice how you can make use of the forum. For example, we tell you how you can click a special link so you can print it out without all the advertising floating around the outside of it. So that way, if you printed it out, you can read it on the bus going to work or the train. Maybe when you're finished and you enjoyed reading it, you could hand it into your local library so people could read it there. We also show you how you can subscribe to the forum if you're a member. Bearing in mind you don't need to be a member to read it, but you do need to be a member if you wish to post a message in the forums. Although having said that, the newsletter forum is the only forum we allowed non-members to post a message. But mostly it's text, and over the years I used to put up a whole book, but with all the other stuff I was putting up, people were emailing me all the time saying, "Alistair, you're putting far too much information up. We just simply can't read it, and there's a lot that we'd love to read, but we just don't have the time to read it all." So that made me change the way I did things. And bearing in mind that when I launched the site in 1997, there was no Internet Archive, Google didn't exist, Microsoft weren't scanning books in. So the only way to read these antiquarian books was to go to a rare book department of a good library, and there you were allowed to borrow it to read it in the reading room because you weren't allowed to take it out of the library. And so you had to read in situ, make your notes and stuff like that. So I thought way back then it'd be a great service if I found some really good antiquarian books, and I actually OCR'd, that OCR is optical character recognition, OCR'd them onto the website. So what I've developed over the years is that some books that I put up are in text, but some of them are in PDF format. But the idea is that where I OCR something in text, when I put up a book and announce it, I will then put up a chapter a day until that book is finished. So that means you've got a better chance of reading the book. When it comes to PDFs, we might put 2 or 3 chapters up a week of the PDF books, because we'll take a PDF and we'll split it down. And of course there are some books that are not scanned because they're copyright, and I'll tell you about one of those in a minute, in which case we'll scan it in ourselves, and sometimes because of maybe all the illustrations in it, we feel it's better to scan it as a PDF file. And that's basically what we do, but then we'll maybe put up a chapter each week, and again until the book is finished. And of course, in each weekly newsletter, what I attempt to do is tell you what's up that week, but I'll try and give you a little flavour. So if I'm putting out one book, like for example when I start a book, I'll give you the preface within the newsletter so you can read it and you can then decide for yourself, that looks really interesting, I'm going to read that as it goes out. Or you might of course think that's no interest to me and move on. But when I'm putting up a book, I'm in the process, I'll tell you what chapters went up that week, and I might take a few paragraphs from one of the chapters just to give you a feel for what's being talked about. And you might find when you read these chapters, oh, that was a good wee story, I think I'd like to read more. Well, normally when I finish that, I'll give you a link saying if you'd like to read more of this chapter, click here, and I give you the link, and I'll also give you the link to the index page of the book, in case you decide you've come to it late and think, oh, I'd like to read the whole book. Well, there's a link there to the index page, you can then read all the chapters from there. So that's the concept of the newsletter, and usually at the beginning I'll have a Electric Scotland news item, and that's where I'll maybe give you links to other resources, something I've read. For example, This week I was told about Scottish celebrations in Argentina, and there was a very good article, I think it was on the BBC, about what they were doing in Argentina on the Scottish ethnic side. And so I told you a wee bit about that, and I put a link to the BBC page where you can read more about the story. And I'll do that kind of thing. Sometimes I use the news to ask you for some assistance or help, because at the end of the day, being a one-man band working from home, I don't have the luxury of talking to a team of people and trying to decide where we're going to go next. So I'm kind of slightly reliant on the fact that people will give me valuable feedback and I can maybe take things on. So on to this week's newsletter. We started a new book. Robert Bontyne Cunningham Graham is the person's name. This is basically a biography of him. He was a Scottish politician, a writer, a journalist, and an adventurer. He was a Liberal Party Member of Parliament, an MP. He was the first ever socialist member of the Parliament of the United Kingdom. He was a founder of the Scottish Labour Party. This is 1888 to 1893. But then he became a founder of the National Party of Scotland, and in fact was the first president of the Scottish National Party in 1934. So clearly this is a fascinating guy, and when I read the brief outline, he'd run a ranch in Texas in the United States. He'd also run a ranch in Argentina. So a fascinating guy. Now, we got this book, which is copyrighted, I might add. It was published in 2002. But John Henderson, who helps us a lot on the site, John's a school teacher as it happens, but he retired to Cyprus. But on his latest trip back to Scotland to see the family and everything, an old friend of his actually wrote this book. And John persuaded him, and he's agreed to give us permission to actually publish the book on the website. So John's got the book, and he's basically scanning it in chapter by chapter, and as he gets it in, he's sending it in to me, and I'm putting it up on the website. So we've already got the first few chapters up, and personally I'm really looking forward to reading the whole thing. I mean, this is obviously a fascinating individual. And then we continue to work on the historical tales of the wars of Scotland. This is actually a 4-volume book. And what we're doing here is we're splitting it up into individual PDFs for each of the wars. We've just completed volume 2, and so we've just got the first story up for volume 3, so we've still got all volume 3 and 4 to go until we complete. So this will go on for probably a few months yet before we entirely finish. But this is where I'd like to read you a little bit of the preface of the book, because I think it sets the scene. Basically it's saying the present work consists of a series of historiettes, or narratives connected with Scottish history, which it is hoped will not be deemed uninteresting to the experienced reader, while to young persons and those of mature age who have not access to many books or leisure to peruse them, it will supply them with a much valuable information concerning the several localities with which they are acquainted. These historical tales are constructed on the same principles as Sir Walter Scott's Tales of a Grandfather, differing only in this circumstance that, as every narrative is complete, no chronological arrangement is followed. This may be alleged as injudicious by some readers, but the plan was adopted to combine variety with agreeable information. The work pretends to nothing new, nor does it interfere with any of the existing histories of Scotland, and as it is designed for general use, the great object is to condense the substance of many large and valuable volumes in a convenient compass. The whole being carefully selected and compiled from the most authentic histories, chronicles, diaries, and original MSS preserved in the public libraries and in private collections. These narratives are designated historical tales for the same reason that Sir Walter Scott calls his History of Scotland, for such it is, on a small scale, Tales of a Grandfather. There is neither fiction nor romance introduced, and the authorities are laid before the reader at the commencement of each narrative. Well, you know, when I found that, I just thought, this is stunning information. But I have to say, I'm totally amazed at the sheer number of wars and everything going on in Scotland. I mean, 4 volumes, and there's a lot of battles and all kinds of confrontations going on. You know, I mean, Scotland was a hard place to live in, obviously, in the old days. But with this, every week, we'll put up 2 or 3 of those narratives, and so each week we'll tell you it, and we'll give you a link to the index page where you can then click on the individual story you like. Normally when we're doing a big volume, we work from the top down, so the latest editions are always at the foot of the list. And then another publication we do is the History of Fetteschan. This is a parish in the county of Kincardineshire. I do like to continue to do work on places in Scotland, and they might be major cities or just towns or just glens of Scotland. But I think that, to me, they're all interesting because these more focused, shall we say, books tend to give us a little bit of an insight in how people lived in the old days. So at the moment I think we've got 65 places in Scotland that we've already got books up about. And this Fetteschan one is interesting because I think it gives you an example of how the books can be used by visitors to the site. For example, I've had it in my work in progress list for a wee while, and I got an email in from the Wood clan. And essentially they said, we noticed you're intending to publish this and we wondered if there's any way you could bring it forward, because we are arranging a big family gathering and we're hoping we'd learn a lot about the Woods, because Fetteschan was a core area of where the Wood family was brought up. So I was more than happy to help, and in fact that's why it's now going up. And again, because it's one we've OCR'd in, a chapter goes up every single day until we'll complete the book. So as I'm putting that up in the newsletter, I'll tell you what chapters we've added that week and a link obviously to the chapter. Now, what I will also do from time to time is take a particular chapter and maybe take 2 or 3 paragraphs out to give you a little flavour of what you could read in that particular chapter. So invariably what I'll do is, when I do that, I'll say you can read the rest of this chapter and I'll give you the link to click on, so you can just go directly to that chapter and finish reading it. But I'll also give you the link to the index page of the book, so if you've missed previous chapters, that way you'll be able to pick them up. We'll then move on to other books, like for example, we're working on William and Louisa Henderson right now. These are missionaries. Now I've found reading books of Scottish ministries that have gone all over the world, I am just gobsmacked at what they did. For example, we've got several missionaries in Africa, but isn't that, they're not there just to give the word of God and convert people to Christianity. They do so much more. I mean, for example, one of the missionaries in Africa built up an agricultural college there. So the young people could come and study agriculture, find out the best practice, how to make the fields more productive, to perhaps grow different crops, how to manage animals and so forth. I mean, they did much practical good use for the local people. And they affected hundreds of thousands of people's lives in a very positive way. And I just think we need to tell these people's stories. In the case of William and Louisa Henderson, they started their work in Jamaica and were very effective there, but then they moved to Old Calabar in Africa, where they finished their missionary life effectively. And again, it's a fascinating story because it opens up what life was like in those areas in the old days, as well as telling you about their work. So again, this is one that we're doing chapter by chapter until it's finished. Then we have a slightly different mix. For example, John Henderson that I mentioned before. John has been building his Scottish sing-along section. And these are old favourites. Mucking of George's Byre, you know, and The Scottish Soldier, and all these old kind of famous Scottish songs. Well, what John's done is he's found a lot of the original songs sung by the various artists. He's converted them to a wave format, so they're not of the highest quality, but they're certainly adequate to get the song. And he's transcribed the words from the song. So when you go to his section, you click on a song, you'll go to a page where the text is there of the lyrics of the song. But at the top there is a link. And if you click on the link, it'll bring up a new window where that song is then sung to you. So of course what you can do is minimize that window while it's singing along, and you can follow the text as they're actually singing the song. I think it's a great way for you to learn the words and everything. And I think we've got about 117 songs, I think, to date. That's off the top of my head. But it's a fabulous resource. And of course, John adds to those from time to time. And this current week, for example, he's got yet another song he's added to that list. And again, we'll tell you about the song and give you a link so you can listen to it. But John also does other Oceanic books that he finds of interest. Quite a lot of the stuff he does, he loves poetry. And he thought that Electric Scotland should portray some of the more famous poets that we have that perhaps today a lot of people don't even know about. But in their day they were very important people, and everyone knew their work. So another of the books that we started is about George Butrum. He was an advocate, a lyricist, an editor and proprietor of the Glasgow Herald for a time as well. So again, a very interesting person, but he produced one book only of poems, although apparently he did many more privately, but it was called Legal and Other Poems. And so what we've done is we produced a little biography about him, so you'll understand who he was. And then John is actually cutting up a PDF file, so every week until again we finish the book, there'll be PDFs of the various poems that he wrote. And John himself has done a huge amount of his own history. And so in fact you'll find if you go to our main menu, for example, you'll see John's page. And it's because of the sheer volume of work that John's produced and given to Electric Scotland that we felt that the page or his section was more than big enough that we should highlight it on our main menu. And boom, that's where it is. And I might add, when I'm talking about the menu, this last week we've done a total makeover of our whole menu system, and it's now much larger than it's ever been before, because there's just so much big stuff on the site. For example, Donna Flood. Donna Flood is actually one of the matriarchs of the Ponca Indian tribe in Oklahoma. But in her heritage, she's got Welsh, English and Scottish ancestry going back. But she's writing all kinds of material. In fact, she also has her own forum on our Electric Scotland community. She writes about all kinds of things, but she also writes about Indian lore and all kinds of things like that. And she talks about her Shalako school, where she was brought up. It's one of those Indian schools that Americans put together to educate the native Indian children on the way of life in America. So there's lots of stories about that school on the site. So again, in her case, there's Donna's page is in the menu. And I say, if you go to the site, we've got a link to songs with this new menu, and the songs will take you to John's sing-along section. And so that's what I mean about expanding the menu, because the site is so huge that actually you can miss whole sections of the site. It's a bit like we've got a link for articles. That now goes to historical articles where we have over 200 very good stories of all kinds of things to do with Scotland. A lot of these stories have come from old magazines or old antiquarian books where we haven't taken the whole book, but we thought there was a chapter in it that we thought was really interesting, and so we've maybe extracted that particular story and put it up as an article. But some people also send us their own articles on something to do with Scotland, and that's where we'll include it. Another section we have is Best Family Tree. Beth Gay, for some 15 years, was the editor for the Autumn Library Family Tree, which is in Moultrie in Georgia. And she ran this for 15 years. It was in two sections, Section A, Section B, and at one time she had about 100,000 circulation for that publication. But the library, for whatever reason, decided that they didn't think that was what they should be doing, and so they stopped the publication. But Beth, having done it for so long and having so many friends in the Scottish community, decided she'd like to continue it. So she continued it in a PDF format because she didn't have the money to print it out any longer and send it as a publication. So the only thing she could do is produce it as a PDF file. And so ever since she started that, Electric Scotland has always hosted all her copies of Best Newfangled Family Tree, as it's now called. So if you click on Best Family Tree in the menu, you go directly to that current issue of her publication. But there's also a link to archives where all her previous publications are. So you can read old copies of the Family Tree. And as Beth is immersed, she goes to a lot of the Highland Games and will take a range of photographs and put them in her publication. But she writes about individuals. She brings stories together from all over the place. I think principally it's an American one, but clearly over the years people have purchased it in Scotland and in Canada and Australia and so forth. But I suppose principally it's tending to be an American publication. But like currently she's got a regular column about whiskey. She always has the flowers of the forest, so people that are prominent in the Scottish community that have died, she'll profile them and give a wee bit of a story about them. I mean, it's a good mix of reading, and it's funded by advertising, because luckily a lot of the clans will give a little bit of money to get a clan advert in, or the big Highland Games might give her a bit more money to get a full page advert in her publication for their Highland Games and so forth. But certainly it's a wonderful read each month. It comes out monthly, and I'd certainly encourage you to have a look at it. And as it happens, this week the June edition for the Best New Family Tree is now available, and again in the newsletter we'll give you the link to go read it. And then we come to clans. There's quite a few clans over the years have sent us old copies of their clan newsletter. Now on the whole, a lot of clans see that quarterly newsletter as being important reason why people would be a member of a clan and actually pay some money. But there are a few clans, and only a few clans, that as soon as they produce a new newsletter, they will send it to Electric Scotland for me to put up on the site. There are other clans, a few other clans, which will send it to us 1 year in arrears, because they figure, well, the membership should have the benefit of seeing it first, but once the year's up, we'll start sending you the copies. There's only a couple that do that, and there's quite a few that will maybe send us an odd issue. Maybe it's a very special issue, and in there they're giving you some particularly special information about what the clan is doing, and they want a wider amount of people to read it. But certainly I can tell you that Electric Scotland is very happy to get copies of newsletters of all the clans. This particular week, Clanross has sent in their spring newsletter, so again you can read all about Clanross activities in Canada. And I would say that as we finish a book, for example, I've just finished the book Kay's Edinburgh Portraits this week. Kay's Edinburgh Portraits were brilliant little biographies of lots of prominent people, and a lot of the people that they have in their publication were actually national figures in the whole of Scotland. But the pen portraits they put up are fascinating and a most enjoyable read. And we've been working on that for some months. There was about, I think, 150 or so portraits. And so we've been putting up one a day. So obviously over the last 150 days we've been putting up one a day. Well, we've just finished the 2-volume set this week. So we obviously, when we finish a book, we immediately move on to a new book. And the new book I'm introducing this week is called Our Own Folk. This is a book by James Engels, and it's actually been memoirs of man's life in the Mearns and a crack about old times. This was published in 1894. Now, I did a kind of book like this before. I was doing the history of the province of Alberta in Canada. And in that particular book was, Volume 1 was the history, but Volumes 2 and 3 were actually biographies of prominent Albertans. And when I put that up, I put the whole of the first volume up, but when it came to the second and third volumes, I only put up the Scots. Although I have listed all the names, but I was principally interested in the Scots, so I only did biographies of either Scots or Scots descendants. And basically the biography had to state that they were either Scottish or a Scots descendant for me to put it in. There was, I think, a few more which I figured were Scots, but as I didn't actually say it, I didn't actually include them. But out of all that, I learned about James McDougal. Now, his father was a Scot, and he came over as a Methodist minister and missionary, particularly interested in converting the native Indian tribes to Christianity through the Methodist faith. And so James was brought up on those lines himself, and as a wee boy he could speak, I think, 2 Indian languages before he could speak English. But he then went on to write about 6 volumes of his life in Alberta, growing up. And of course at the time he's writing, there were no railroads, there were no roads, so the only way to get around was by horse or on foot or by dog sleigh, and obviously on the rivers by canoe. And as I read those books, I just enjoyed them as books. They were a great read. I mean, I just loved reading it, but it also gave you an insight into so much of what life was like back in those days. So I decided that to complement that history of Alberta, I would put all 6 volumes of his book up on the site. In fact, it's all up now. You can read the whole thing. But likewise, this James Engels that we're starting with, Our Own Folk, he's really talking about growing up in this little area of Scotland where his father was the minister. And he talks about growing up, and he talks about the people he interacted with. In fact, it's a charming book. I, again, just thoroughly enjoyed reading it. But then he went out into the big wide world, and I found he had written 3 other books. One book was Our New Zealand Cousins. This was produced in 1887. He then wrote Our Australian Cousins in 1880. And in 1892 he wrote Tent Life in Tigerland, because for many years he was a planter in Nepal and India. But he clearly had worked for a time in New Zealand and Australia as well. And he's relating his life and the people he interacts with and stuff. So this is like following a Scot and finding out what he found out when he went to those countries. So clearly I'm hoping that everyone will enjoy our own folk, but perhaps our New Zealand visitors in particular will enjoy reading our New Zealand cousins. And likewise our Australian visitors will enjoy our Australian cousins. And perhaps the people in India will enjoy reading about tent life in Tigerland. I might add, by the way, that looking at our visitors to the site, the 5th most visiting country is now India. So we clearly have a lot of people coming in from India, so hopefully they'll find that of interest. But I kind of imagine that I've enjoyed all 3 books, so I'm hoping everyone will actually enjoy them, whether it's New Zealand, Australia or India. But it is fascinating that here's a Scot brought up in a manse in Scotland, and here he is going out in the world and writing all about it. So that's the kind of stuff you're going to be reading this week on Electric Scotland, this week being the first week of June in 2011. And that's really what my newsletter does. It more or less in text format explains what's going up that week, and give you some little insights into the book by quoting a few paragraphs from various chapters, and obviously giving the links if you wish to read more. The only other thing I might add is that in the news side, I quite often plead for feedback. It's just that as I work on my own and I work from home, I don't have a whole team of people to talk to, so if I can get feedback from my newsletter readers, I'd be absolutely over the moon and delighted. And we're always looking for interesting articles from whoever people are. In fact, if you yourself are living somewhere in the world and you're of Scots descent, if you've got a story of your own family, how they came to be in the country that you're now in, love to hear the story, and please consider it. We're always working on ongoing projects, and I hope to be bringing you very soon. I think we'll start a section saying A Scot in China, because I've been in touch with an old friend who is now living and working in China, doing an import-export business there. So I'm hoping he's going to tell us a bit about himself, a bit about his business obviously, but then I'm hoping he'll go on and tell us about people he meets in China, and get his local Chinese employees to perhaps write a bit about themselves and what the life is like in China. So I think that might be an interesting new section for the site. So we'll see how it develops. Anyway, there you go. That's the Electric Scotland newsletter, in which I'm giving you a bit of an overview of what the newsletter is about, but I'm also giving you a bit of information about what's in this current issue that will be going out very shortly. Okay, thanks for listening to me, and hope you enjoyed it.